Right, now here we are with the chronology, so strap yourself in because this is going to probably take a while. If you're writing a chronology on a liquid logic based system, so that's ICS, LCS, things like that, it will look more or less something like this. This is clearly fake. You know, I made it in PowerPoint. I don't claim to live a very exciting life. That's how I spend my spare time. Chronologies are another of the most misunderstood and misused documents in the social worker's arsenal, which is a shame because when they're used properly, they're one of the most useful that there is. But, like other documents I've discussed, I very rarely see them used well. So to start with, let's talk about what a chronology actually is. A chronology is a history of the child and family's life. It is their story. Social worker involvement will be part of their life and therefore part of the chronology, but it is always an add-on. It is never the main event. Often I'll see chronologies start with the referral and list what the social worker did, when they found out about stuff, when visits and meetings happened, as if all of that is really important in how the child experiences their life. That's not what a chronology is. It does nothing to help you in your work. It does nothing to help the children in the future understand things. So look at this chronology. I have absolutely no doubt that every single one of you have cases that look like this, at least in part. This sort of chronology has been compiled by clicking the Add to Chronology button within the case notes and other things. There's been no editing, no review, no thought about whether this is a useful document or what it'd be used for. The person who owns cases that look like this have been told, there's no chronology on this case, go and write a chronology. They just went through ICS clicking their mouse button like it was connected to the caffeine drip. The extent of chronology training most social workers get is that it must be of significant events in the child's life, but very rarely what that actually means. Today, I am going to try and tell you what that means. A chronology is a recording of the important things in a child's life which together, and that's the important word here, together, contribute to what's going on in the child's life now and what's led up to here. It's common to think of a chronology of going forwards in time because that's the way that we read and understand stories. But to start with, I want to talk about a chronology looking backwards in time. So the situation that the child is in now is almost certainly a result of what's gone on in their family recently. So let's think about the toxic trio. So that's domestic abuse, mental health, and substance abuse. In Johnny and Tara's life, there's definitely alcohol abuse, there is increasing domestic abuse, and there's likely some form of mental health difficulty, although we don't really know yet enough about what that's about. We also have some questions about Lucy's motivations and what's got her where we suspect that maybe she's making excuses both to herself and to Suzy about why she's, putting up with Mike's poor behaviour. So these are things which are happening now, but each of them has origins back in time. If we want to address those issues in the present, we have to understand how they started in the past so that we're addressing the cause and not just the symptom. This is where your chronology is essential, and it's essential that it's written well. We probably won't be successful in helping Mike stop drinking and understand how he's hurting his family unless we're able to identify when and why he adopted this behaviour. Having a chronology of his life will help us see the series of events which were formative for him. Remember when I spoke about those developmental switches previously? Essentially, a chronology is looking at what those switches may be and may have been in a person's life. The things that cause Mike's life to go in this direction instead of in that direction. Usually, to get a clear understanding of how things got to where they are now, we have to start with the birth of the children's grandparents. For a short chronology in an uncomplicated case, maybe you can go back to the birth of the parents. Sometimes you might have to go back as far as the great-grandparents if you're looking at multiple generations of whatever the issue is. Now, that might sound like a lot of additional work, but honestly it's not. There's ways to write a chronology which give you the full picture, but don't require you spending hours trying to find out exactly what day they moved house back in 1983. So let's have a look at the draft chronology for the Barnes family here. First, I want to talk about the format of a chronology. You can see that there's 4 columns on this one: date, event, source of information, and impact and analysis. I've chosen these 4 because they're the most common ones I'll see in chronology templates. Now, the template that you use may differ. Maybe it's missing one of the latter 2. Maybe it's got other columns which import some data from the case note, like category and type. Those columns are useless, by the way, and only exist to cause confusion and suffering. I really do not like them. Anyway, I'll go into these 4 in detail a bit later on. For now, let's just look at the first 2 columns, date and event. But first I want to point out the way that Suzy has written to the children within the chronology. She's put it against a date very far in the past so that it remains at the top of the screen. She gives some guidance about what things in the chronology mean, so different coloured writing, the meanings of the column names and so on. And again, she largely lets her work speak for itself rather than explaining every small thing, but she does think about what they would need to understand right at the start. Quick note, do not write a chronology to the child unless it's part of direct work that you're doing with them to help them understand their life. It just makes it much too complicated. Dates and events. So this is an early version of a chronology. You'll see that it covers nearly 65 years in just 2 pages. Like with genograms, chronologies are living documents. You should create one at the start of your work with the family and revise it every week or so, when you get additional information. Pause the video and read through the chronology. Have you read it? Great. So you'll notice a few things to start with. 1, there's a lot of approximate and unknown dates with little asterisks next to them. As I said, this is an early version of the chronology. Having approximate dates is fine to start with. You can always go back in and put the correct dates there and the chronology will just rearrange itself. Now, the other thing you'll see is that the further back in time, the more you'll see approximate dates and large date ranges. On the first page, where it goes back to the 1960s, they're up to 20 years. On the second page, closer to now, they're only 1 or 2. Third thing you'll see is that I've used some different colours at different points to indicate different people's views. Now, only as an example here is so far there aren't major disagreements in what people are saying. When you've got a very contentious family history, this will help distinguish whose version it is in the chronology. In the family history case note, I spoke about a rule of 3, where you divide historical information into 3 sections based on the content that you're describing. So first was each parent's family history and their experience as children. The second was the history of their relationship before they had children. And the third is the family history since the oldest child was born, even if that child's now an adult. Those 3 sections involve stages in the parents' lives which will have impacted them around how they parent their children. It doesn't work for absolutely everyone in every case, especially where people have really complex lives and relationships, but it's a good rule of thumb. Adapt as needed. Now, there's a second rule of 3 for writing chronologies. This is about the amount of detail you need to include at different points in the chronology timeline. So first, more than 5 years ago, very little detail except where necessary. Some specifics will be in the impact/analysis column, and we'll look at that later. You can have huge blocks of time covered in each entry more than 5 years ago. Dates also don't have to be exact. Usually within a year is good enough unless the event is very significant. Second rule, between 2 and 5 years ago, you're going to want a moderate amount of detail. You can have blocks of times, but these should be on the order of weeks or months, not years. Approximate dates should be avoided where possible. And final rule is that the last 2 years should contain a lot of detail. Each event should have its own entry in the chronology, and this should have a specific date unless there's a good reason why you can't identify that date. Now, more distant dates are important if they're part of a pattern of behaviour, if a specific event was traumatic or beneficial enough to have a major impact. A random home visit a social worker did in 2017 isn't required to be in the chronology unless something happened which made it a significant event, like a disclosure or the social worker witnessed an act of abuse. Bog standard home visits and meetings and phone calls and the like are just not required in a chronology. Likewise, you don't have to include every incident of a parent missing an appointment. A single entry saying mother missed 13 out of 15 set appointments in 2018 would be sufficient. When you're covering more recent time periods, it's much more important to show each event because it shows how the family is doing now. How frequent are the incidents that you're concerned about? How are they engaging with support? Who in their lives are they seeing frequently? The past 2 years will give you a better indication of what will be going on for them now. Your aim is to try to have a chronology be no more than 3 to 4 A4 printed pages. Maybe up to 6 if there's a really, really complex case with quite a number of kids. Now, I can read minds and I hear some people are saying, but what about children in care or where you've had a CP case open for years and years? And others are saying, yeah, okay, I get all that, but I've got a chronology which has just been copied from case notes and is useless, but it goes back to 2009 and I'd feel really weird just deleting it. What do I do? Now, those are very good questions, hypothetical viewers. Where cases are open for years and years or have been just written terribly, this is where the archive and delete buttons are your friend. So let's go back to that pointless chronology we saw earlier. Now, personally, if I saw this on a file, I'd just delete it and start over, but I know that some people can be a bit funny, and that's not what they want to do just in case something in there turns out to be important. Others maybe have a chronology which is mostly terrible, but not entirely. There might have been a social worker a few years back who actually did a reasonably good job for a period of a few months. But even so, they want to do a rewrite rather than just spend forever trying to edit that mess. Both of these thoughts are valid. Now, if we scroll right down to the bottom of the screen under the chronology, you'll see this archive button. What that does is it saves a copy of the chronology as it is right now. You can still go into it, you can still read it, you can print it out, you can even pull it back into the main chronology at any time if you want. So go to that messy chronology, find the archive button and click it. You will probably get a prompt up asking you to name the chronology archive. Just give it the family's name and the day's date that you're doing this on and click save or OK or whatever it is. You'll then see a table start to form down the bottom of the chronology screen with your saved chronology on it. Click in, make sure it's worked, then come back out. Now comes the fun part or scary part, depending on your point of view. Click delete chronology. And then click, yes, I'm sure I want to delete this chronology. You'll then have a gloriously empty chronology page which you can fill up with a good chronology. So let's see what that looks like. Back to the full version of the Barnes family chronology. So let's go through each column briefly. Date might sound simple, but it's not. This is the date that the event happened. It is not the date social care was told, usually. Often I'll read a chronology and there is a note saying, Mum told me that she was assaulted last Sunday. Well, that should be against the date on Sunday, not the date that you were told. Occasionally I'll even read an entire family history written against the date of a single home visit when the social worker was told all that history. Honestly, it makes my head hurt when I see that. Now, there's going to be occasions when it's important to record the date when you find out information. So it might be that that information has been hidden or just not come to your attention, and you have to clarify why action is delayed. In those cases, you put it in twice. Once when the event actually happened, with a footnote if you think that that would help a reader. So, for example, 31st October 2021, Bob hit Dave, brackets, not known by the social worker until the 1st of March 2022, end brackets. And then on the date that you were informed, 1st of March 2022, Dave disclosed being hit by Bob last October. Section 47 initiated. That way, someone reading will be aware of when it happened from Bob and Dave's perspective, but also from when the social worker found out, and it explained why the Section 47 was initiated 5 months after the event. The date can be as accurate as you can make it. If that means to the nearest decade, then that's fine. If you have to pick a date, then go for the middle of the range and use the 1st or the 15th of the month as an approximation. If it's a year, just go with the 1st of January if you don't know what month it could have been in. If your Chronology software has a date approximate box that you can tick, use it. If it enables you to have a date range, use that as well. Date ranges are great to have, especially for things which happened many years ago. You can pack a generation's worth of information into a small space. Moving on. Event. This is a concise account of the event. Nuance is not necessary. I usually push you to be specific and detailed with your writing. Not here. Be as brief as possible without being excessively vague. So, first incident of domestic abuse is a bit too vague, but first incident of domestic abuse, Mike came home extremely drunk and slapped Lucy, their children hid under their bed, is just right. You can put directions in the event column as well to give some context around the accuracy of the date. So if the date is approximate or even just a complete guess, this is how you can make that clear to the reader. Not knowing the exact date shouldn't prevent you from including it in the chronology as close as you can. If it's important, you just have to be clear that it isn't exact. Never, ever, ever copy entire case notes into a chronology. You put a summary in the chronology, and if I need more information, I know to look at the case note. And this is where the next column, source of information, comes into it. If I wanted to get more information about this particular event, where would I look to find the overall context of this particular chronology entry? Was it in a case note of a discussion that you had with someone? In that case, you put, as I have here, discussion with Lucy on the 10th of July or whatever the date is. Was it in an email or a text? So you put where that was. Text received from Lucy on date ABC. You want to be clear about where you got that information from, because if down the track you're in court or something and someone says, no, I never said that, you want to be able to point to where you have a contemporaneous recording of them saying it. This column will guide anyone reading the chronology to that case note, assessment, whatever it is, where that's recorded. So where I complained before about a social worker putting in an entire family history against a single date of a case note when they were told, the point of this column, source of information, is so that you have the date of that case note, that date of that home visit in the chronology, but you're saying that that's when you got the information. You're not putting the case note, the home visit itself, in the chronology as if that was the important bit as opposed to the information. Impact analysis. Now, I'm cheating slightly here. Usually a chronology template will have one or the other of these rather than mushing them together like I've done here. While they don't mean exactly the same thing, they're close enough that you don't really have to worry about it. What you record here is how the information in the chronology entry is relevant to the rest of the family's story. I said earlier that looking back in time, you start with the drug abuse, domestic abuse, whatever that is happening today, and then you go back from there seeking out which things, at least partly, led to this situation. This column is where you draw those connections from the event in the past to what's going on in the present. You can draw connections explicitly or implicitly. That's more of a stylistic choice, and quite often it will depend on how convinced you are that the connection is direct and solid. Personally, I tend to prefer implicit connection and allow the reader to draw their own conclusions, and you can see where I've done that in this chronology. Against Mike's upbringing, I talk about how physical chastisement and alcohol abuse were normalised for Mike as a child. Now, that's implicit because I'm presuming that whoever reads it will keep that in mind as they keep reading and notice the patterns of that being there themselves and draw that conclusion themselves. Or I could be more explicit and draw a direct connection here to his later behaviour. As I say, I personally trust my readers will be able to follow that themselves. Sometimes if I really want to drive the point home, for example, maybe in a court chronology, I might be a bit more explicit about that. But really it's down to you, and have a chat with your manager if you want some more guidance. Right, so here's the second part of the full chronology. This goes into more recent events, so the dates are more exact and more specific. However, there are more gaps, especially in the impact and analysis section, because Suzy's still writing the chronology. This is just a draft after all. Not everything has to be filled out immediately. You can see there's parts where Suzy recognises that she just doesn't know why something happened at this point, and that's fine to acknowledge in a draft chronology as well. Hopefully by the time the assessment's completed, she'll have more information and be able to update those sections. With this chronology, Suzy has a very good idea about the family's history leading up to the events of the referral. She knows that Mike appears to have had significant trauma in his early life, but she doesn't quite yet know what that was. His parents split up either shortly before or after the death of his sister, and Mike's had little contact with his mother, at least recently. His father drank a lot in his physical chastisement and possibly abused him. When he met Lucy, he was a bit obsessed with her and wanted to get married and have a perfect family, possibly because his was so damaged. For a while this went well, but then when it started to go south for some reason, still don't know why, he resorted to what he knew as a child, drinking and aggression. From Lucy's side, we can see that she was born to parents who weren't really interested in each other and were pushed into their marriage by their families and their culture. Her father left, and the men in her extended family really didn't make much of an effort to spend time with her or get to know her. Lucy and her mum both rejected the culture that pushed them away. Her mother's later partner passed away. Her first boyfriend just sort of drifted off. Mike really was the first male to show ongoing commitment to her, and she seems to have accepted some mistreatment from him as the price of commitment. So with all of that being visible in the chronology, we have a good chunk of the assessment done. The family history and some analysis and so on. So by using the chronology in this way, we're able, just in 2 pages, to really have a good understanding of how things got to the point that they're in now. And so if we're going to look at how we can help Lucy and Mike be better parents to the kids, Mike especially, we look at what's in the chronology, and the work that we do going forward with Mike would probably be looking at how the death of his sister, his mum running off, and his dad's behaviour affected him, and why he feels that he's copying some of his dad's behaviour with his family now, probably unconsciously, because it sounds like he wanted a perfect family, not a family like he had when he was growing up. And with Lucy, maybe we want to explore what this abandonment and being ignored and rejection and stuff in her past may have contributed to the way that she makes excuses for Mike. So by looking at the chronology overall, we see that that's how things got to here, and it then puts us in a position where we can plan forwards, knowing what the, at least potential, causes of the concerns are. Maybe new information will come in and change that, but for now, at least, we've got a starting point to think about where we're going with this.